I think there are times where second acts kind of hit you over the head of like the timing is obvious. And
Right.
there's others when it's not. And I would actually say in HubSpot's history, the timing wasn't. It was actually an incredibly intelligent, forward-looking view from the founders and the executive team, going into the IPO, really doing this exercise of, hey, we want to be growing 50% year over year, 5 years from now. What does that look like? And working way back, what do we need to do in order to maintain that type of growth rate? And that's really what informed them to say, you know what, we've got to start figuring out our second act now. And that was not the case with Reforge. Course business took off from day one. It was like the most instant product market fit that I had ever felt in my life in the amount of pull. And that's what it felt like for, I would say, the first 6-ish years of the company. We bootstrapped it for the first 4 years to over 10 million in revenue. We then venture funded it and, grew to like 30 million in the next 18 months. And it was just like getting pulled out of us. But then there was a series of a few things that happened in a pretty short time window that made it pretty clear that we needed a second act. We're kind of borrowing from the frontier, but trying to make sure it's rooted and there's like a bridge towards the real problems are facing. And you see all these studies now, right? I don't know if you've seen these like studies going viral about like 95% of AI deployments are failing
Yeah, yeah,
inside companies and stuff. And I think the root cause of it is like they don't really understand how these other types of enterprises and companies truly work, like what their workflows look like, the problems, how the decisions get made, what their underlying technology actually exists, like all of these really messy things. And as a result, I think we've had a bit of an advantage there. When we think about model channel fit, it's starting to break some models like freemium based models where like that thrive off of content sharing and virality and stuff. And I've seen this because I've been looking, we're constantly looking at, acquisition targets. And so I've seen inside some of these companies, and I won't name names, but they have these freemium models. They're borrowing models from the historical thing. And then when I look at the cost of the freemium model and what the free users are, it totally breaks the economics of the business. Everybody's saying, saying like all these negative things about whether it's Cursor or other people who are rumored to be very net negative on economics. But it's a normal part of the cycle where there's like new demand. The demand outpaces our innovation of figuring like all of these things out. I just talked to like the Acquired did a podcast on Google and they talked about this in the early days. It took them a couple years to figure out the right monetization model for search. And I think we're just at that part of the cycle in the figuring out part of the cycle, because I think the demand for these products is very real and the value is very real.
Welcome. This is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the exacting foundational shifts of scaling up. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at ChargeBee. This season, we are diving into AI's all-out enterprise embrace and how that's accelerating second acts everywhere, reshaping software categories, business models, and reorganizing teams to meet never-before-seen stakes. This episode's guest is Reforge's founder and CEO, Brian Balfour. Whether it's a forfeits framework, the missive on how retention is always a silent killer, the idea that growth loops are the new funnels, or more recently, a sharp prediction on the next great platform shift, Brian's deeply researched work has shaped how thousands of modern product and growth teams operate. During his tenure as VP of Growth at HubSpot, he helped kick off one of the most defining second acts of the past decade, their big move into the CRM space. He has spent the last 25 years studying, documenting, and applying the core primitives of how the best software companies grow. In this conversation, we get into how Reforge education business was the most important PMF that Brian had felt, bootstrapping to $10 million in revenue, then growing past $30 million within 18 months of their Series A. How the tech downturn and the AI stuck as collective whiplash. A framework on how he figured out Reforge's brilliant second act, which has resulted in them launching multiple AI native products just this year. Why AI monetization is breaking the forfeits model, the rapid iteration that pricing right now requires, his reflections on what made HubSpot's second act work, why most AI products are overbuilding for Silicon Valley, and Reforge's core product insight. Izzy the Inventor, and a lot more. Let's dive in. Thanks for joining us, Brian. So excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Right, let's dive in. So I want to start with Reforge's second act.
Mm.
You've recently launched two AI native products, Reforge Insights and Reforge Build. And I just saw you posting on LinkedIn about AI Interviewer.
Hmm.
Congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you. Yep.
Uh, but we have all, of course, known Reforge since 2016 as an education business. It
Hmm.
focused on delivering access to specialized knowledge from some remarkable practitioners. What finally made you feel that the timing was right to shift into products, and why now? Right? And what
Yeah.
steps did you take to decide on acquiring the first product, Monterey AI, instead of building it in-house?
Yeah. So to back up just a tiny bit, um, this isn't my first second act, right? That was actually what I did at HubSpot. And that was part of my core mission of joining HubSpot was that when I joined, we only had the marketing product. And the mission was myself and a couple other incredible people in Christopher O'Donnell and Mark Roberge and Michael Peachy and a couple others uh, were really tasked with figuring out the second act. This was before they had the whole like product suite. And I think the product suite now looks obvious in hindsight. I can tell you when we were in the moment, it was not. And uh, and I think to compare that to Reforge and getting to your question is I think there are times where second acts kind of hit you over the head of like that the timing is obvious and
Right.
there's others when it's not. And I would actually say in HubSpot's history the timing wasn't. It was actually an incredibly intelligent forward-looking view from the founders and the executive team, going into the IPO, really doing this exercise of, hey, we want to be growing 50% year over year, 5 years from now. What does that look like? And working way back, what do we need to do in order to maintain that type of growth rate? And that's really what informed them to say, you know what, we've got to start figuring out our second act now. And that was not the case with Reforge. So for a little bit of the history is that I started Reforge out of HubSpot. I didn't really necessarily start it with the intention of an education company. I just really loved f- growth, product, figuring out, what, frontier practices were. I had a big network around those things. And I also, just based on some previous skill sets, had a knack for distilling those things into helpful guidance for other people who wanted to do those, to do those new things. And so my obsession was more about like finding the frontier leaders and figuring out what they were doing and how do we, help the rest of the ecosystem. Now that took the form of courses for the first, big majority of the business. But I didn't necessarily sit down and say I wanted to start an education company. My obsession was more with this obsession around growth and product and startups and all those things. Those are the things that excited me. And so it just so happened that the course business took off from day one. It was like the most instant product market fit that I had ever felt in my life in the amount of pull. And that's what it felt like for, I would say, the first 6-ish years of the company. We bootstrapped it for the first 4 years to over 10 million in revenue. We then venture funded it and, grew to like 30 million in the next 18 months. And it was just like getting pulled out of us. But then there was a series of a few things that happened in a pretty short time window that made it pretty clear that we needed a second act. Those few things were first, we went through the tech downturn of 2022 and our category essentially got obliterated. I don't know if people know this, but there's over a $500 billion plus education companies that literally imploded in that time period. Like they are worth pennies on the dollar at this point. And so, whatever hard times, like that comes in every single category. So that wasn't the key thing. But then there was like a couple other things, and the main thing was AI, right? And when AI kind of came along, it really forced a decision for us, and we like a real question of like, okay, how is this going to affect content, education, all of those pieces. And we ended up with, we knew we needed to take a big bet, a big second act. And we felt like we could have taken it in one of a couple directions. In Reforge, we teach this framework around product market fit expansion, literally this, like second acts. And we break it down into a few choices. You can either develop a new product and sell it to the same market and audience you have today.
Right.
You can take the same product and adapt it and sell it to a new market, right? Or you could do both at once, develop a new product for a new market. And the third one tends to be the riskiest and the rarest, but all sometimes like the biggest return, like AWS coming out of Amazon was an example of that one. But most
Right.
people start in one of the first two buckets. And so we looked at those two paths. What would it mean to take the same product and go to new audiences? Well, that would mean like expanding across a bunch of different functions, a bunch of different long tail topics, like a bunch of other pieces. But then we also looked at the second option, which was, what about taking developing new products for the same audience that we were in, which was really around product and growth. And we ended up on that second one for a whole host of reasons. But primarily the first one, we just felt like the underlying disruption, changes, and headwinds of AI around content and education businesses were strong and going to get a lot stronger, like over the years.
Yeah.
And so even if we took the same product to new audiences, it's not like we would have solved those headwinds, right? And so then we clearly got into a mode of like, oh, well, if we stay in that category, not only do we need to get into new audiences, but we're going to have to disrupt our own like underlying product at the same time to like really put it on the path. And so we kind of added up all of those things. And in addition to that, it was going back to the origin of Reforge. It was not like the educational side of things wasn't necessarily the core passion. The core passion was around product teams, growth teams, and startups. And so we ended up in the second category. We had way more ideas about how do we build new products for our existing audience. And that not only leveraged our existing assets, we thought much better, but it actually leaned into the tailwind of AI versus fighting the headwinds. And so,
Changing behaviors
yeah.
of people, right?
What's that?
The behaviors of people was continuously shifting when it comes to how they learn, how they are applying those, and
Yeah,
finding
and
that
and the biggest thing that we heard actually from our customers was two things. It was not only do we need to figure out the tools to shift to an AI native world, but we need the learning and knowledge behavior change. And we were like, oh, like we're actually uniquely positioned to serve both of those things together.
right.
Now, it required, and maybe we can go into this, it required a bunch of hard changes in order to enable that second act. But that's kind of how we got to the decision. We were on this growth tear on the original business that whiplashed in the matter of months. And as a result, we and some new developments and innovations and technology disruption that kind of forced us into this decision around a second act. Whereas HubSpot was a totally separate experience, it was good anticipation of a future facing problem. So two totally different experiences.
Right. I have a set of questions on HubSpot, right, to dig in further.
Yeah.
So we are definitely going to discuss that. Awesome. So this is fantastic context, right? And we believe that the vertical and service businesses, those that have built great context on the problem and customers over time, are now structurally advantaged in the AI age. And it will be great to hear how almost a decade of serving product and growth teams, like what is it unique insight that you find, like especially when you think about competition, how do you think about this and the competitive advantage that comes through unique insights in this particular space for you?
Yeah, I mean, we have unique insights in a couple different places. One from our customers, but we also have this very large, we call it an expert network built up over the years from the education business. Because once again, the whole business was let's find the frontier leaders doing really amazing things because we think those things that are uncommon today will be common tomorrow. And so let's figure out who's doing those things and what might be. And so we kind of get insights from both places. We both the frontier as well as the broader market. I would say that compared to others, this is pretty common, not just in our category, but across all categories in technology, which is I think that people overbuild for the Silicon Valley tech company as a customer. And something that happened over the years of Reforge is that as our presence grew, we actually ended up starting to serve much larger enterprises that you would not consider to be in that core like Silicon Valley tech. I'm talking like healthcare, fintech, retail, all of these places that actually have huge technology teams now, very large product teams as well. And I would say that the super majority of the technology market is now outside of Silicon Valley in terms of just raw number of people
Yep.
and in dollars and all those types of things. And so it was interesting, like immediately had kind of line of sight into what problems that broader market was facing versus like the leading edge. And as a result, I think we build our products a little bit different. We build our products a little bit differently. We're kind of borrowing from the frontier, but trying to make sure it's rooted and there's like a bridge towards the real problems are facing. And you see all these studies now, right? I don't know if you've seen these like studies going viral about like 95% of AI deployments are failing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
inside companies and stuff. And I think the root cause of it is like they don't really understand how these other types of enterprises and companies truly work, like what their workflows look like, the problems, how the decisions get made, what their underlying technology actually exists, like all of these really messy things. And as a result, I think we've had a bit of an advantage there. Our vision for our suite of products, which we're three-quarters of the way through, we're about to launch a fourth one in a couple
Wow.
months, is that we believe, if you look historically on product teams, what's happened is there's all these steps in the product development process, from research to synthesizing an insight to forming a hypothesis and roadmap to validating to design to you can like go through all these different steps of the process, right? And over time, what's happened is that not only have we accumulated, in many cases, 3 to 5+ tools at each one of these individual steps, also we've required a ton of specialists to operate each one of these individual steps of like internally. And so product teams blew up from this core triad of a PM, designer, engineer to many times evolving 8 to 10 different specialists, from user research to product ops to PMM to a data analyst to like QA. Like there's just like all these different specialists. And the
Right.
challenge with that is that it makes the product development process super fragmented, super slow, tons of coordination tasks, and you just don't end up with great products at the end of like the best products are built by small teams of folks iterating very fast, tightly with the customer, but there's so many roadblocks that end in the way. And I think AI is going to really enable more teams to get back to those roots. And so we're going to have a full suite of products from insight to launch, by
Yeah.
the end of the year that are usable and operatable by anybody on the team, a PM, a designer, an engineer, so that they can participate in the whole process rather than it kind of going through this sequence of 12 different hands and context lost and stuff. So
You're,
that's how we're thinking about it.
I think I can relate to it because some of the things is like how much ever you are great at documentation, it is so hard to sometimes capture that intuitiveness that you carry when you speak with customers, or like I said, the PM or the person who's very closest to the creator, creator's intuition and insight. How do you transfer that to a number of people, if especially if your process becomes like almost like a factory model of handing over from one person to another person, right?
I'll add to
And
that, but not only transferring to other people, but transferring to AI now, right? Because AI requires context. All these tools require context to give you good outputs, right? And so you not only have to translate to humans, but all these other AI tools. And with every handoff of human to AI to human to AI, right? Like you're losing all of that along the way. And so it's interesting how AI even amplifies that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and but the advantage of actually tight teams is actually um, like more pronounced than ever, right?
Yeah.
A slight digression, right? How are your teams organized around these products that you are launching? I'm curious because the pace at which you are launching is actually fascinating. So I'm curious to know how's your team organized?
Yeah, first of all, huge credit to the Reforge product and Inge team, and we made a couple acquisitions late last year to really change, to match the DNA of the team that we needed to enable this whole strategy, and they've just knocked it out of the park. But it's organized exactly how I was just describing. Each product essentially has somewhere total between 4 and 7 total folks, so they're tight teams. The lead of the team is always they're always a blend. Of somebody like a design, like a product design person or a product eng person, like they're always have like a little bit of hybrid talents, and in those teams stay incredibly uh, tight, close to the customer, and they relatively operate independently, though we're like starting to bring the products together in a tighter way as we head into next year. So our total team size is still pretty small. I think we're less than 40 people across the entire organization. And, obviously that's not all product in Inge. And that's across 4 different and soon to be 5 different products when you include the learning product as well. So it's tight. It's tight and small, but it enables a lot of like really fast shipping and learning as well.
Brilliant. And I'm going to be like, I'm curious to see how you will spend time as each of the product scale, customer base scales. I'll be
Oh, I'm
very curious.
stretched thin.
I know,
Yeah, I'm,
I can
I'm
imagine that.
stretched thin. It's
Right?
it's
Where do you,
interesting. We've really hit a point, and my guess is this is going to resonate with a lot of folks, is that we are shipping way faster than we can move on the go to market side of things. And even from our customer base and audience as well, as like we are landing these new products faster than that humans can absorb. Like we have this saying in our AI strategy course, is that AI just gets you to the hard part faster, which is how do you build credibility and trust and adoption with like humans, and that stuff doesn't move at the speed of AI code gen. Like that still requires a lot of stuff, and so it's definitely a new dynamic. It's a new problem, and it's something that I'm feeling strongly and trying to figure out as well.
Brilliant. Awesome. Back to this particular question on the same track of Reforge's second act. In a recent interview, you had mentioned how you missed a foundational law of retention with Reforge's core training programs. Can you please speak to that and also how that applies as much to the early wave of AA products?
Yeah. So let me explain the foundational law first, and then I can tell you where we went
Yes.
wrong. The foundational law is that to start at the very top is right, like retention makes or breaks companies, right? They determine the category winner in every single category. If you look at a category, all the competing products, the one that always emerges as the clear winner is the one with the highest retention and engagement. This goes across things like social, different mobile categories. You're even seeing it in like AI chat right now. ChatGPT has the highest retention and usage. They're clearly on a breakout path compared to everybody else within that experience. And so that has played over and over again. So if you know that, then the second question is like, okay, how do I build something that is really high retention and has really high engagement? And what we've really learned over time is that 80% of your retention and engagement potential is actually pretty baked into the natural frequency around your use case. So let me explain that. So every product targets some kind of use case. That use case has some sort of natural frequency of use, meaning like the customer experiences that problem in that use case, at some frequency
Like a monthly
naturally in
report
their
for
life.
finance person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or a quarterly report that's needed for book close at the end of the quarter, like something that I relate to. Like
Yes.
there is no way you're going to try and increase the frequency of that.
Great. Exactly. It's like close your books, 10 times. No, that's not going to happen. Right. Um, so yes. And so 80% of it is baked in that. And you can't really, it's, there are examples of people changing it or evolving it, but it's usually by launching adjacent use cases that tend to be higher frequency. So a classic example of this was Calm, started as a meditation app. Their
Yep.
retention and habits really took off when they launched the sleep use case. Because guess what? Sleep is something we all have to do every single night, right? There's a lot of pain around those things. There's a lot more visceral rewards when you sleep better. So all of the habits and the frequency around that use case were much stronger, and then that bled over to some of the meditation stuff, right? But it wasn't. But that's kind of an example of like you can launch these adjacent additional use cases to increase the frequency of the overall product, but in the use case itself, it's really hard to change. So that's the fundamental law. Now, there's a bunch of things you can do on top of that. There's a bunch of like activate users better to that use case. Um, a lot of stuff around, increasing their time spent every time the problem occurs. That's good for some use cases, bad for other use cases, like all these different things to like get from that 80 to 100%. But that's the fundamental law. I think with Reforge and in the learning use case is that at the end of the day, the majority of the market, the vast majority of the market, even with all the things out there saying like always be learning and all those kinds of things, is that most people just don't think about it that way. They think about it as an episodic use case. I might need this thing. I might need to learn and go really deep on something. I don't know, pre AI, that might have been like once every few years. I guess now in the world of AI, with everything moving so fast, maybe people feel it a little bit more frequent. But it's not like a daily thing. It's not really a weekly thing for most professionals. And especially, in the professional world, it's not like we're in school full time. It's not like we have those habits and those other mechanisms built in. And so we tried a lot of things to change this, like different product experiences and other things to get people to engage on a more frequent basis. And they just none of them worked. Like at the end of the day, and none of them really moved the needle on this. And it sucked because our biggest churn response has always been, I love Reforge. I just don't need it right now. Right. Like that's so much people think is like, what do you do with that? In some cases I would rather you say like you had some kind of problem that I feel I can fix. But that was the biggest response. And so, there was at some point I just kind of called it and I was like, you know what, like we're gonna stop, trying to change that natural behavior and more just like really try to, when they are in that mode, just really freaking nail it and make it a great experience for them, because when they do come back around and have that need again, maybe a couple years down the road, that's good. And it's the same thing with most companies too, is most companies would adopt Reforge for an episodic use case. They were going through some kind of digital transformation. We were going from sales led to product led, or project management to product management, or like all these different use cases. And they're different, point in time needs. And so it just, in that makes that's why learning businesses are really hard to grow, is because of this episodic nature of the use case.
Right. Makes sense. Now I'm curious to shift to the HubSpot part of the story. And so the our podcast itself, we started to document how SaaS companies were layering new S curves of growth, right? Like from our own experience, to try and learn from others, like how do you actually think about new markets, new segments, new product lines, and the role that these new operating and business models play in unlocking these things, right? So I'm curious to actually hear from your experience, especially from the forefront of defining the second act, especially of the past decade, right? The HubSpot's entry into CRM space is something
Mm-hmm.
that we've all watched and so curious to learn from, and have all tried to learn from so many things. And I have a few questions related to it. And I think in the context of how much is changing in the current market, I think it's going to be highly relevant. So first, you have previously mentioned in some of in your the forfeits framework related writings that this particular project was almost like a startup within a startup,
Mm-hmm.
deliberately set up that way to counter organizational debt.
Mm-hmm.
And as a lot of late stage teams rush to launch AI native offerings, right? And there is almost like a pent up need and desperation to actually want to transform the organizations. What are some guiding principles that they should keep in mind, especially when going through this type of a change? And how you think about, like, because there are teams that are being set up individually to say we are going to have an individual team which will demonstrate how
Yeah.
it's done the new way, and then we will actually use that to transform the entire organization. And then there are companies that are actually trying to change everything wholesale, and there are no particular playbooks. So it'll be fascinating to actually, if you can reflect on some of that, and
Yeah.
walk through some guiding principles.
No, I think you're right. Like, I think, AI has basically forced many companies into figuring out a second act, or whatever you want to call it, a parallel act. Because like it's the whole thing of like, how do we disrupt ourselves? And I would say that, so at the time, I wouldn't call it organizational debt. I would call it organizational habits, which is, look, fundamentally the same organizational habits that you use at 100-person, 400-person, whatever scale you're at, are not the same habits you should use at a 5-person early stage startup trying to figure out product market fit. And in fact, many people have tried, right? Like, to do those things, and it doesn't work. It just straight up doesn't work. You need a specifically like a specific set of people with the right attributes and DNA for the stage that you are at, and the right processes, the right closest to the customers, the right iteration loops, the right product development, like all of these different things. And I often find it interesting is that you hear the common advice that in startups, like, you have to, if you're a growing startup, you have to basically swap out your executive team every few years to essentially, have the right habits and DNA to keep growing. But the same thing happens in reverse as well. But most people don't kind of equate those two things. And so, anyways, the way the HubSpot, this was not my choice. This was set up by the executive team. So basically, the way that it was initially treated and changed over time was, it was like a startup within HubSpot. I believe we were around 400 people, something like that. And they basically told Christopher O'Donnell, Mark Roberge, and myself and a couple others, they were like, okay, you're over here and your mission is to do two things. One is that we want to get into the sales software space. So you need to figure something out and get to product market fit on that. And then two, we want you to do it in a more PLG way. Those were kind of like the two missions that we went on. And so we were in like a different part of the office. We did not adhere to the same product development processes as everybody else. We did not participate in all of the core companies, rituals, all these different things. And so we were completely separated from it. And then we would basically meet with our board. Our board was Dharmesh Halligan and our COO, JD Sherman. I think every month or every 2 months, right? And so it was just like, startup founders kind of presenting to their board. And at the end of the year, we would go back for our next round of funding, right? And every single year, they would give us a larger and larger amount of funding. Similarly, and so the whole I think premise here is, one is constraints are good, right? That's and you can't you still have to put constraints in place. Two is that I think people underestimate the amount, like, that the organizational habits that they've built up over time just like do not apply. They do not create the same success conditions for something super early stage. And then I would say the third one is that I've seen others, they try to skip steps in the process, meaning like, oh, like we're so confident in this idea, we're going to throw 30 people at it from, the get-go, like something that an early stage startup would never do, right? Or it can't do because of their constraints. And so I don't think you can skip steps, but you can use those resources to flow through steps faster, which we definitely did. Like when we got products out there, because of our existing HubSpot customer base, we were able to get it in front of our target audience much faster, learn much faster, iterate much faster. So we got through that product market fit stage much more quickly than we could. So that was kind of the first stage of it. And then they kind of repeated that with we went from what is now the Sales Hub. We did that for the CRM. We did that for the support product, the service product. And then after I left, they also did it on an operations product. But at some point, they had figured out the motion and the actual expansion strategy to a perfect enough formula that they were able to do it with inside the core machine rather than treat it out and then absorb it back in. But for that first one, while we were figuring it out, where we didn't have all these plans around the CRM and all of these other products, and we were just kind of figuring out what we needed to do, it was it would not have succeeded otherwise. I guarantee it would not have succeeded otherwise had we not do that. And there's trade-offs. There is pain in absorbing it back into the core part of the company. Don't get me wrong, but the alternative is like the thing just never succeeds. So accept that pain.
Even website pricing, everything was separate, right? If I remember correctly.
Sorry.
Even the website pricing.
Oh yeah, website branding, all of those things were separate initially until we had enough like enough product market fit and confidence, and then we kind of pulled it back in. Yeah.
And the easier answer is that most people will. The argument is to say, oh, let's make sure that this is going to be hard, so let's make sure that we consolidate systems from the beginning. Is the argument a lot of companies try to make, but it's like having 100% of a zero.
Yeah.
You're trying to have the perfect process from the beginning, but you're never going to actually like figure this out.
Yeah, you never figure it out. And you see like some of the early successes in AI have repeated this. Intercom, which has been an amazing turnaround story, with their Fin product, have done this. You can even see that on their landing. Go to their landing page. It's literally split in half and is pointing you to like essentially two different companies. And that's because they needed to do it. Like they needed to do it, and it worked. And I think we're gonna see more of it.
Yeah. As a founder, sometimes I actually feel like I'm mentally taking notes when you are actually saying those things, saying, "Oh, yeah, I wish we had fixed that." Right? It's continuously happening in my head as I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to skip this section without talking about the 4FITs framework. Right? So you wrote about this, especially this is like a classic case study, right, for defining the 4FITs framework: market product fit, product channel fit, channel model fit, and model market fit, right? And I've quoted this several times internally in our conversations, especially because you can actually like use it as a filter to ensure that you're thinking through everything. And today, when you are building this in a competitive category, this is actually applicable, right? Where we are all in the middle of a great platform shift with AI. Can you map out how differently you are approaching the 4FITs framework with Reforge's own new products?
I've had this updated post in draft mode for a long time, and I just have not been able to get it over the line.
We'll include it.
Yeah, to publish it. So the quick context on the forfeits is when I originally wrote that article, everybody was talking about product market fit, and like that's all people were focused on. And I think through my experiences is I had experienced some things where I felt like I had gotten product market fit, but there were like these other missing ingredients, and also vice versa. It was like I had some scenarios where we got a lot of distribution, but we didn't necessarily have product market fit, right? So I started to piece this together, and I was like, oh, there's actually these four core components, and not only they're not independent components, they actually work as like an interconnected puzzle. And HubSpot was a really interesting case where we went through some evolutions of the early product, the sales product, where we changed some things around pricing as an example. And what that did is it forced us to also change how like the channels we were using in some of our go to market. And because the pieces didn't all fit together as an interconnected system. And so yeah, the four pieces are product market fit. That's kind of the classic a classic thing. The other one's product channel fit, which is about you have to mold your product to the channels. The channels don't mold to your product because you're not in control of your channels. You're only in control of your product, right? And you're also not in control of where your audience spends and consumes their time. And so you have to tap into these places. And so you see like the best products, the most explosive products are built in mold and like kind of fit into the places that their customers spend their time, whether that's on SEO or social or all these other places. And so then there's like channel model fit, which is more like, okay, you can't expect to grow via virality if you have, your monetization model is like a 1 year, $50,000 like upfront agreement. Like that just doesn't, those two things don't fit together, right? And then there's model market fit, which is just saying, okay, if you take your monetization model and you look at your market and how many people are in it, do those two things equate into like a big enough business? And so all four of these things have to like be true and to work together to, I think, build a really explosive company. In AI, like we've seen some pretty big disruption in a couple different places. I would probably say the number one place we've seen it early enough is on oh gosh, it's so hard to rank these, but certainly on monetization models has been a core piece, and then what I think we're really starting to see is on the channel side of things as well. So on monetization model, the biggest thing everybody's wrestling with is that in typical SaaS and software, the cost to serve, an incremental user was basically nothing, and that enabled all sorts of new models like freemium, seat-based pricing with like universal usage, like all these types of things. But I think we've already started to very clearly see that those things don't work yet in AI because AI actually costs real money to serve your user in a meaningful
Plus, it
way.
breaks the other mental model, right? You just spoke about the expansion, which is how do you think about how do you think about growth when you think about monetization and per user, like thinking about the number of employees in each department
Yes,
is one of the easiest formulas that people use to say, okay, marketing department, how many users per user per month, and in
correct.
sales department and support department and so on and so forth. You could expand and think about expansion in very differently for each of your products. But today that fundamentally breaks because you're not going to imagine very large teams. So then how do you then compute, okay, what am I building for and how am I going to even grow this?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, in general, on the spectrum of pricing options from seat to usage to outcome based, right? And that spectrum basically what it does is it moves the things that are changing the farther you get to the right end of that spectrum towards outcome-based pricing is that the vendor, the company, are taking on more of the risk of delivering the result. But in response, you tend to be able to capture a little bit more of the value that you generate. And it's kind of the vice versa on the opposite end of the spectrum. And so what we're seeing is a mix shift rightward on the spectrum. Most people from seat based to usage based. A lot of talk about outcome based, but there's still a very small percentage, I think, that use outcome based, and I think maybe a greater percentage of the market will get there over time. But
Eventually,
I think, but I think the challenge is, and that I'm seeing, is that when we think about model channel fit, it's starting to break some models like freemium based models where like that thrive off of content sharing and virality and stuff. And I've seen this because I've been looking, we're constantly looking at, acquisition targets. And so I've seen inside some of these companies, and I won't name names, but they have these freemium models. They're borrowing models from the historical thing. And then when I look at the cost of the freemium model and what the free users are, it totally breaks the
Yeah.
economics of the business. And so it's, in old freemium models, you would still include that cost to serve in your CAC, but it wouldn't, you could still make the economics, yeah, you could still make the economics worse. And in a lot of these use cases, I'm seeing it break it. And so then you say, okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of VC dollars funding that right now. Let's just pretend that goes away at some point. And then all of a sudden they're forced to figure out a new model and they can't do freemium anymore. Well, okay, like that's not an easy change, right? Like that's fundamentally changing
Who you
kind of the
acquire,
things.
like
Yeah.
onboard. Yeah.
So there's all these things. So I think the fundamentals are still true, but the puzzle pieces have reshaped. And we're still in that mode of figuring out what the new common assemblies will look like. And I think that's a normal part of the cycle. Everybody's saying, saying like all these negative things about whether it's Cursor or other people who are rumored to be very net negative on economics. But it's a normal part of the cycle where there's like new demand. The demand outpaces our innovation of figuring like all of these things out.
Right.
I just talked to like the Acquired did a podcast on Google and they talked about this in the early days. It took them a couple years to figure out the right monetization model
Right.
for search. And I think we're just at that part of the cycle in the figuring out part of the cycle because I think the demand for these products is very real and the value is very real, but we're still figuring out the other components.
I think that the one of the most important things I think for me, the takeaway is the deliberateness that is needed in making these choices.
Yes. Yeah.
Is I think is going to be extremely important, right? Because everybody likes to be the outlier, like a cursor, right? But like it is very important to actually think through the choices we are making around those when it comes to this.
Yes, 100. Yeah, 100%. And like what I always say is that you know you at least have to have hypotheses at the beginning, because then you can actually test those hypotheses as you like launch the product and all that. Like they don't all fit immediately at once. You're super lucky if that happens. You can even
Right.
see this with Cursor, the exception, right? Massive breakout growth, but they haven't figured out their monetization model yet. That's pretty clear. That'll support them long term at least. So
And the competition also continuously makes everybody move right really fast. Like when I see Lovable actually like making teams as part of their freemium plan, now you see that there is going to be a different move from Cursor, like and so on and so forth. So there is that continuous delicate dance.
tit for tat. Yeah.
Respond to this.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Beautiful. So monetization growth. Let's double down on that a little bit more, right? So you rightly described previously about pitting monetization and growth against each other as a false choice, right? And
Hmm.
you instead urge that we think about. I'm going to quote you that which model will create the most long-term happy customers for similar reasons, right? I also believe and have written about like the same recent fixation on whether an old pricing model is dead or whether an emerging model is the future. I believe it's wrong, right? That type of
Hmm.
fixation. So it's important to think about the situate the monetization choices in the wider business context and then make iterative bets, right? Which is some companies do really well. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about this multi-piece puzzle as you have perfectly described it is stacked in the age of AI when margin profiles have changed so much and how that's informing the way you are pricing Reforge's own products. How are you
Yeah.
thinking about your product pricing? And I'm pretty sure like it is supposed to be iterative. So, but would really appreciate if you can actually talk about some of the uh, thought process behind it, which will be very educational in nature.
We're in the thick of it for sure. Yeah. So the multi-piece puzzle I described, there's kind of two pieces of it. There's the puzzle pieces of the two kind of different parts of it. There's the puzzle pieces that make up your monetization model. Most people, when they think about monetization models, they just think about price, like how much does this cost? That's one of the pieces. But the other pieces are, what's your value metric? So how does price scale? Essentially, that's what we were talking about before. Is it per seat? Is it on some usage metric? Is it a hybrid of those two things? Is it outcome based? Like all these different components, right? So value is one piece. Price, how much is the second piece. What you charge for, that's really kind of like what features go in what packages, is the third piece. And when you charge is the fourth piece. That's like, are you doing a freemium model or is it like a free trial model? Are you charging up front? All these types of things. And all four of those things kind of fit together in a different puzzle piece. And so with that puzzle, it has to pass three checks, is kind of or three filters is kind of how I think about it. The first filter that it has to pass through is what I would call the customer view, which is when the customer looks at it and looks at this price in their head, like they're not doing this rationally, but emotionally, the equation that they're doing in their head is like, do I think does the perceived value of this product exceed the perceived price of these things that are in front of me by a multiple? That's really important because people don't adopt products if the perceived value is like incremental to the perceived price. I think there's been a lot of research. Maybe you all have done that. I don't know on this, but I've heard a lot of numbers like most traditional SaaS businesses really only capture something like 10-15% of the true value that they create. And this kind of goes to show is like customers need to perceive the value to be a multiple more than the perceived price to justify it. So that's the first check it has to pass. The second check it has to check is the growth model. So your monetization model either enables or disables different types of user acquisition motions. And so you were just bringing up an example, the Lovable example, which was actually Elena Verna made that change. And that's rooted in the change that she made at Miro as an advisor, where Miro a long time ago, their main acquisition model was through virality, right? But when she was there, the change that she made was their pricing model, the free plan, it cut off the number of users you could invite. So you could only invite like up to 3 users or something like that to a Miro board or project, whatever they call them. And so what they saw was rather than people upgrading they were doing this odd behavior where they would delete people and then add new people. And that sucked because it took access away from people that they had invited previously. So those people couldn't build the habit and the person wasn't upgrading either. So they changed that. They changed the value metric of their monetization model, that first puzzle piece I just mentioned, to be about the number of Miro boards rather than the number of users. And what that did is it unlocked the viral loop and also made their monetization better. So it has to pass that check. That's the second filter. And then the third filter, which we just touched on, is this wasn't a common filter that used to be a big deal, but is now, is that it has to pass the cost to serve checkpoint, right? Which is that the monetization model sufficiently supports, your cost to acquire and cost to serve these customers. And so those are kind of like the three big check marks. Now, I think the hard part with AI right now is there's this whole question of what actually happens to these costs. Do they actually decrease? There's this notion out there. There's a lot of people taking bets that they're going to decrease by 10x. And this guy named Ethan Ding, who's a founder of TextQL, this AI company, wrote this great blog post. He presents a counter hypothesis, which is saying, yes, the price of the older models decrease over time as new models emerge. But if you look at the price of any new model, the best model at any given point in time, that price has relatively stayed the same. And in addition to that, the use cases around these models are more complex, so they consume more tokens. So actually, the price is going up. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens to that over time. And that's certainly a question that we think about in Reforge as we're thinking through our monetization model. And we have these separate products. And so Insights, is priced on data volume and data usage. It's unlimited seats. And the way that we thought about that was we're aggregating, analyzing, and helping you act on all of your different customer data and customer feedback. That feedback and data, it's like one orange. and we want to help you squeeze as much juice out of that orange as possible, right? And as a result, unlimited, the unlimited seats, unlimited use case, unlimited use of the AI on top of it, and we just charge on the amount of volume, the data volume that we're processing per year. But when it's coming to our prototyping product and our research product, we're literally in the thick of it right now. We're trying to figure out how we want to price those things. How can we simplify and make it, across these boards? We don't want to make the pricing so different from product to product that it's impossible for each person, to
Right.
comprehend. And so we're kind of facing this, we're facing this question right now, and we'll probably end up with some form of some form of, like, at least on the prototyping product, some form of a hybrid model right now of like seat plus usage, something like that. So none of these products are very well suited for outcome-based pricing yet. So we're not going there. But I think the biggest shift that I've had to take in my mind is you used to do maybe a pricing change once per year, something like that. But you see a lot of these players now, they're doing like three, four, five changes, in a relatively short period of time just to adapt as the underlying technology and costs adapt. So I think we're
A lot of
more
micro
getting into the
testing.
model of changing. Yeah.
Right. A lot of micro testing and a little bit of changes like everywhere, right? At least in moving the value metrics around and changing the packaging is going on.
And that's hard. Like, changing pricing is not easy for both from a customer communication standpoint, but just also from a underlying technology standpoint as well. So it's just,
I
I'm
would
sure
love to
as
give
you
out
are
of the
very clear about. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I
You're
would love
very
to give
aware
out
of.
of the topic for like, yeah,
Yeah.
but
And so,
because we
yeah.
love this favorite topic as an infrastructure
Well,
company.
I was just gonna say, look, like, just to be clear to those listening, you did not ask me to say this, but I do think products that help you be more versatile and adaptable are have become way more valuable right now in this day and age to help you kind of innovate and adapt further. So yeah, like that is definitely an underlying tailwind on the AI side.
Thank you. One just for the listeners' benefit, I think the blog you are referring to is Ethan Ding, right?
Yes,
ETHADING dot substack
that
dot. Right,
yeah, that's
that's the
correct. Yeah,
okay. Very cool. Thank you. So, prisoner's dilemma. Let's go to that. I love the way you
yeah,
describe the prisoner's dilemma of platform shifts in your blog, right? Where I'm going to quote you here. Like everyone knows how it ends, but everyone still plays because the alternative, letting competitors claim the early advantage, is worse. Right?
hmm
It's a quote from one of your blogs. And this is specifically like I want to ask this question with respect to specifically ChatGPT. You predicted that ChatGPT will be the next great distribution platform. But unlike the past shifts with Google and Facebook, for instance, and I found that blog fascinating about the how mobile apps took off, especially when
yeah.
Facebook figured this out, like where it was consumer focused companies that took the lead first. Do you see that this time it's the enterprises that are having like stronger traction earlier? And it'll be really helpful to have you unpack this with enterprise B2B lens or examples. And if there are any particular cautionary tales around it. And the questions team should be asking to avoid the platform graveyard situation.
Yeah. So I think actually the place that we've seen the most explosive growth and traction is what I would call prosumer. So it's not like true enterprise, it's professionals, but it's like individuals in these like self-serve use cases. I actually think on the enterprise side, it's been slow for multiple reasons. One is I think when an AI kind of initially came out, the message was all fear based. It was like, oh, AI is going to consume all of your private data and expose it to people, and everybody's going to train your models on it, like all that kind of stuff. And so that immediately put companies in this massively defensive stance if your product touches any of their data, which almost all AA products need to touch a company's data because it needs the data and the context to produce a helpful and reliable output. And so that's created a bunch of downstream friction and sales, like all these other things. You're seeing all these studies come out saying like all these enterprise deployments are not being successful. And on top of that, you kind of see this weird thing, which is what people are doing is companies are taking like a small piece of a larger workflow and process and trying to replace it with AI. They're trying to make it more efficient with AI. And so what you end up with is what I've been referring to internally as like the Frankenstein's monster of tools of where it's going between human non-AI tool, AI tool, human AI tool, non-AI tool, like that. If you like just map out the whole workflow. And so when you look at it and you lay it out and then people are like, this hasn't been massively transformational. It's like, well, yeah,
You are
look at the
digitizing a broken digital process.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I think where we're really going to see the results is people thinking about these workflows and processes from the ground up. And so in the enterprise market, it's interesting. The things that have been most successful are those with like forward deployed engineers who like really get in there and kind of like, really can think about the things from the ground up. But so prosumer has been interesting. And I would actually say like, you look, ChatGPT says like what? I can't remember what they know, like 700 million monthly active users, something like that. It's pretty clear they'll probably hit a billion by the end of the year. They're making some really interesting moves around solidifying that consumer position. They just launched ChatGPT Go in India
Yep.
to appeal to more, to like tap into that market in a more concrete um, way. Their late Chat GPT 5
Hmm.
was way less about a model upgrade, in my opinion, and way more about product strategy decisions to reach the next billion users, right? Like if you look at it, they're simplifying down the experience. You don't have to choose the model, it chooses for you. They emphasize a lot of speed, like speed of response and iteration. And you even see some of these like light personal touches in there too, like the color changes. All of these things I think are around, hitting that next billion users, and as a result, like becoming the dominant consumer platform. It's just that, look, it's crazy. My 80-year-old dad uses AI like daily now. He's texting me about it daily, and I just like have never seen anything like this like jump the shark so fast. I mean, it took my parents years to get on an iPhone.
Mobile phone.
Yeah.
Till the touch phones came, my father couldn't figure out like how to actually use a mobile phone. Didn't get comfortable with it because this the interface shift was actually very hard for them. But
Yeah.
the moment the touch phone came, then it actually became much more easier.
Yeah. Anyways, back to the original question, prisoner's dilemma. I find this moment in time very fascinating because it's pretty clear that the what I say in the article and from Casey Winters was the first one to point this out. It was the technology shift of AI came without a distribution shift initially, and that's actually, if you look at history, pretty common. The technology shift comes first, and then a new distribution mechanism and channel emerges later. Typically a couple years like into the cycle, and we're at that couple year point, and you can see things like ChatGPT getting the type of size and the type of traction where it would be attractive for them to enable, a new type of app development platform or agent development platform on top of this distribution and all of those different pieces. And so, and as you mentioned, it follows the same cycle. Like they'll open up these platforms to attract creators and developers because that brings them even more users and more usage and solidifies their defensibility. And so it's kind of like come one, come all, like like we're a great place to build type of message. And then over time, what inevitably happens is that those distribution platforms continue to like shut down and constrain in order to monetize. And we've seen this in search, certainly, right? Like over the years of what percentage of search results have shifted to paid versus organic. We saw this in social. We saw this in mobile. We've seen it in every single distribution shift. And so for those that have seen these things, and what I've seen multiple times is at the early part of those that kind of know how the game ends, they're like, I'm not going to participate in that. Like, I'm not right. But that might be a rational choice if you're living in isolation and you're kind of making strategic choices in isolation. But to your point earlier, you're living in a competitive environment, right? So if you don't do it and you don't like tap into this new channel and build your product into this new channel, the likelihood of one of your competitors will is almost 100%. And then all of a sudden, the expectations from your customers about, oh, like I want your thing to be well integrated to ChatGPT because this other thing is, well, that's the new customer expectation. So you eventually have to mold anyways. And by the time you make that decision, all of the early advantages of being part of a new channel super early in the process are dead. So that's why it's a prisoner's dilemma, which is like, everybody, it makes rationally makes sense independently for nobody to participate, but that's not how it plays out. So you'd rather be early to it than to be late to it, and that's kind of the whole game.
Thank you. One last question topic, capital, right? And highly relevant, especially because of the way the capital markets are evolving and how founders need to think about capital, right? So in your 2021 post announcing Reforge's Series A, right, after 5 years of bootstrapping an 8-figure profitable business, you wrote that venture backed is not necessarily equal to venture scale, and non-venture backed not doesn't mean it's non-venture scale, right? So you also noted that separating those signals is important to managing growth of your business responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like you to talk a little bit about what you mean by that, especially in hindsight. And because I think the fundamental question that you are getting at is incredibly relevant even today, and especially even more, right? When capital is abundant, yet again, given AI, and everyone wants a piece of, like, and want to be in the game, right? And while there is a great uncertainty around how all of this will unfold, I would love to hear your point of view on this and how it's continuing to evolve.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, lots of lessons learned, definitely in hindsight. I mean, I think what I was trying to say at that time is there's many different ways to build a really great business. And by the way, great business has different definitions to different people. And so great business doesn't necessarily have to mean a venture scale business for folks. Like I think I have tons of respect for people who have stayed small and just built amazing quality products and really like own a very specific niche. And yeah, maybe it's not the next $10 billion decacorn, but god, like there are great businesses everywhere. And so there's multiple definitions and there's multiple paths to it. And I think that's the thing that you just need to be aware of is trying to understand what type of business you're building and match the way to like you want to build it, and vice versa. Like we've seen venture scale businesses bootstrap before, right? Atlassian very famously didn't raise barely like any capital until going public, and there's other examples of that, other examples of that as well. So, and I think what AI is doing is probably even opening that up even more, right? There's probably even more ways to build a business. And so I think you just have to really be true to yourself about not only what you're building, but how you specifically want to grow it. And I think in today's, the big thing is that the tricky part, the really hard part, the places that suck for founders and teams alike is when you raise venture dollars but don't have the venture signals. And because that's where the down rounds, the selling the company for pennies on the dollar, that's where all that bad stuff happens. And that's essentially the bet that you're taking when you take venture dollars. And so in hindsight, like in Reforge, we were years in, bootstrap, profitable, but we were seeing all the signals around venture scale, just like crazy demand for every single thing that we put out. Everything that we were doing was working. We had the growth rates on that stuff. We had the NPS. We had all pretty much all of the elements. And but when you're taking that venture bet, of course, you're not taking that venture bet at that moment in time, but over like the entire future of the company. And as what I think a lot of people realize is that things change, like, right? And then we saw that in our categories, just multiple changes. Of course, in any type of massive hype cycle like this, we're going to end up with a lot more players who raise venture dollars without venture signals that don't understand the risks that they're taking. And we're going to end up with a lot of these stories of things imploding overnight, founders, employees not like really getting any. And it's unfortunately another natural part of the cycle. But what I'm equally excited about is that I think there's a whole other set of people who are like, have come to realize, hey, I can build a really compelling, great business with a smaller team of folks, kind of operate it differently, all those. And so I'm equally excited to see all the new ways of building, software companies and businesses as well. So I think we're going to kind of get a combo of both, but we're definitely in that mode. I mean, look, I'm an investor. I've looked at a bunch of deals. I'm just looking at things and I'm like, oh my God, this is 2020, 2021 type of behavior all over again. We're definitely in that part of the cycle. And I think great things emerge from that, but also some casualties as well. So we're gonna
Yeah.
get both.
Yeah. One last question. In 2013, this is about books. In 2013, you wrote about 11 books that had changed your life.
Oh my
And you
gosh, I
just,
have not gone back to this list in a long time.
right. Yeah, not just good books, right? You said, but ones that permanently altered your perspective or perspective on an important element of our lives. So, is there a recent book that has done that for you?
Well, the big change since 2013 is I now have two little kids. And so the first of all, the amount of time I have to read is pretty much none. And the second is the books I do read tend to be of the kid story like nature. So
Awesome.
nothing super insightful. I will say honestly, yeah, I don't know if I have anything. I have to go back and look at that list. I don't know if I have anything to add to that list at the moment. I will say that the positive trend that I've seen is I consume a lot more just like operator influence, like publication. They used to be really rare in 2013, like the people who were writing online in a consistent, high quality way who are also on the front lines. I think you just have so much more of that. And so I don't even have any like specific folks, but some of the articles we mentioned, like like that brilliant article from Ethan Ding. I've been reading a lot of this newsletter called Clouded Judgment. I read these like other random pieces by that are occasionally written by different, chief product officers and stuff. So that's where most of my consumption is today is on that type of stuff. But if you give me a
True.
second, like let me actually, I do keep a Notion folder called Learnings
Right.
that I go back into, and I'm interested to
I think
see.
on that topic, while you are actually looking up, I would actually recommend Mohammed Suleiman's uh, the Microsoft AI
Oh, okay, interesting.
DeepMind founder. His most
Oh,
recent
okay,
was actually is very good. I'm listening to it on Audible. It's very
yeah.
good. Um,
Some things I have saved here just to list them off. There's there's this quote from Jimmy Levine called "Blinders on Horses," where he says, "I don't give an F what anyone thinks when you're a racehorse. The reason they put blinders on these things is because if you look at the horse on the left or the horse on the right, you're going to miss a step, and that's why those horses have effing blinders on, and that's what people should have when you're running towards something. Don't look left or right." Don't think about what this person thinks, just go. Which I thought was like I love that quote. There's some interesting, I've saved a couple things from, of course, Paul Graham about, he has some good stuff about don't be a visionary. He talks about what that means. There's some good writing around moats of the age of AI. There's a few things in here that things that I've saved afterwards. But I now save these little snippets that I get from a bunch of different places and kind of look back on that at this folder maybe once every couple of months.
got it. Got it. A completely crazy recommendation, right? I don't know how, like, if your kids are ready for it. Andrew Matthews, books are amazing for kids. I love
Oh, what
it.
age?
And about 8, when they start reading themselves, it's
Okay.
very easy read. I love it. Like even adults should read it. Like being happy, making friends, like cheesy topics, but it's actually amazing. The way it is written is actually very, very good. So I
Yeah,
think to
yeah.
kids
My oldest he's 6. He's not there quite
getting there
yet, but
to read these.
yeah, but he's
Andrew
getting there.
Matthews.
Yeah, he's definitely getting there. So, yeah, he's definitely graduated into like a new tier of books, and we're trying to figure out what he likes. There's also these books called it's for my younger kid. I think it's called like Izzy the Inventor. But the books kind of take this message of it's like she's this young girl that likes to invent things. And a lot of the books take the story of her constantly running into hurdles around her inventions and kind of like getting them over them in creative ways. I just think it's like a great message around creative resilience. And they're really fun. And so that's Izzy the Gizmo, I think it's called. So, yeah, like,
Good one.
so yeah, there's all sorts of amazing stuff out there for kids. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Very nice. Thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
All your book recommendations, blogs, everything in the slide and the show notes. But really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.